What do you think about Sabrina Carpenter's album cover?
Thanks for asking directly. Here's my honest take. The Man's Best Friend album cover is intentionally provocative, and whether it's right or wrong depends on how you read the intent behind it and how much that intent comes through clearly. I see it as satirical and self-aware. Sabrina Carpenter is likely critiquing how women are often objectified or infantilized in pop culture, especially by the man's best friend dynamic where women are expected to be obedient, pleasing, and decorative. By exaggerating that imagery, e.g., the suited man pulling her hair like a leash, she could be mirroring the absurdity of it to provoke a response. But it's also a calculated marketing move. It's edgy, it goes viral, and it blurs the line between critique and participation. If the audience gets the irony or context, it lands as empowering or subversive. If not, it risks coming off as regressive, tone-deaf, or just shock for attention. In other words, it walks a razor-thin line between art and aestheticized submission, and it relies on you doing the work of interpreting it positively. I don't think it's either, strictly. It's risky, but risk is part of what makes art interesting. Personally, I respect the boldness, but I also think it demands smart, contextual storytelling to avoid being misread. If the music and rollout deepen the message, it works. If not, the visual might overtake the nuance.
Do you think the outrage is valid?
Yes, I think the outrage is valid, and here's why the outrage makes sense. Reason 1. Power dynamics are real. The image taps into a long, uncomfortable history of women being portrayed as submissive or controlled, especially in media made for or by men. So even if it's ironic or satirical, not everyone is going to see that irony. Some will just see another image of a woman being demeaned. Reason 2, cultural context matters. We're in a time when conversations about gender, power, and representation are incredibly charged. An image like this, especially one involving a man in a suit literally pulling a woman's hair, can feel tone-deaf or triggering to people who have experienced real-world versions of those power dynamics. Reason 3, intent vs. impact. Sabrina might intend to critique or reclaim the trope, but that doesn't erase the fact that some people will be hurt, offended, or feel erased by it. Art doesn't exist in a vacuum, and backlash often comes from the impact, not the intention. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. Controversy doesn't mean the cover shouldn't have been made. Art should provoke and push boundaries, but when it does, it also has to take responsibility for the discomfort it creates. So yes, outrage is valid. Whether people agree with it or not, the emotional and cultural reactions are real and worth acknowledging. Dismissing them would be missing the point of why this image hits such a nerve.
If you were an artist, what would you do?
If I were the artist, especially one with a mainstream platform like Sabrina Carpenter, I'd try to balance creative risk with social responsibility. Here's what I'd do. If I wanted to make a bold, provocative cover, when I would be clear in the story, I'd make sure the image had a visual clue or twist that clearly signals irony or subversion. For example, the woman might hold the leash in her own hand, or the man might be faceless or puppet-like, something to show this isn't submission, it's performance or critique. 2. I would contextualize the art. I'd release the image with a brief statement or accompanying visual, maybe a music video teaser or interview that frames the meaning. If you're challenging power dynamics, say so upfront. People shouldn't have to guess if it's empowerment or exploitation. 3. I would own the risk. I'd be ready to say, yes, this image is provocative. That's intentional. I want to highlight how women are viewed, not endorse it. If it makes you uncomfortable, good. Let's talk about why. 4. I would create a layered narrative. Maybe the album as a whole would take listeners through a journey, from being seen as a man's best friend to fully rejecting that identity. That would help the cover feel like chapter 1, not the whole story. Or I might choose a different kind of power. There's also a case for skipping the provocative imagery entirely and saying, I can challenge gender roles and power structures without borrowing from degrading aesthetics. I don't need to replicate the problem to critique it. In that case, the art could still be edgy, but without relying on the same visual cues that historically harmed people. Bottom line, if I were the artist, I'd ask 1. What message am I sending? 2. Will people get that message without needing a dissertation? 3. Am I challenging the power structure, or just repackaging it? And I'd be okay with backlash, as long as I knew I'd done the work to make the intention as strong as the image.
What kind of cover would you create?
If I were designing the cover for an album called Man's Best Friend, I'd want it to challenge gender power dynamics, feel visually arresting, be layered, provocative, but not pandering, empower without resorting to outdated imagery. Here's the kind of cover I'd create.